It began with a virus. But what spread faster was fear. Lockdowns, masks, numbers on screens, a theater of control dressed as medicine. This is the story they don't want told. Wake TF up. The aftermath, when the briefings ended and the dashboards dimmed, what remained was grief. Not the kind that heals with time, but grief that had been denied, criminalized, and stripped of ritual. Parents died alone. Elders faded in isolation. Funerals were replaced by fines, mourning replaced by slogans, dignity replaced by spectacle. The aftermath is not recovery, it's reckoning. It's the moment when people look back and see what was taken, not by fate, but by decree. In homes across the country, boxes of programs from canceled funerals sit beside stacks of unpaid bills. School reports from years spent in isolation and employment records ending mid-sentence. Families have tried to stitch life back together, but the seams won't hold. You don't repair dignity with platitudes. You don't replace a mother's hand with applause. You don't heal a generation by telling them fear was normal. The aftermath is the ledger of loss. Names, dates, denials. Trust is gone. Not bruised, broken. The double standards were not rumors. They were photographed. Parties in offices while people were fined in parks. Contracts funneled while businesses collapsed. Leaders laughed while families grieved. The aftermath is the moment the public stopped pretending the rules were about health. They were about control. Once that clarity lands, it never leaves. In the quiet, people began to name what happened. The world's first pandemic was used to suspend rights, erase rituals, and transfer wealth. That sentence is heavy. It changes how you live. Anger rose, but the aftermath demanded discipline. Rage without form burns out. Discipline turns grief into precedent. Communities began to gather, not for spectacle, but to document. Names of denied funerals. Dates of lockdown fines. Contracts awarded through VIP channels. Money flows traced from ministerial offices to corporate accounts. The aftermath is not shouting into the void, it's building ledgers that bite. Evidence becomes armor. Fact becomes weapon. Truth becomes ritual. Families began speaking plainly to children. You were told fear was virtue. Isolation was safety. Obedience was goodness. It wasn't. It was conditioning. You were taught to distrust your own judgment and outsource your dignity to slogans. You can take it back. The aftermath is re-education, not in classrooms, but around tables. Write what was denied. Name who profited. Explain who lied. Then build what can't be taken away. Local resilience, independent livelihoods, community broadcast, artifacts that teach without permission. The masks fell off. Not the cloth, the narratives. People saw that the medical spectacle had run in parallel with empty wards and choreographed distraction. They saw that celebrity culture turned grief into content. They saw how dashboards measured obedience more than health. The aftermath is seeing clearly and refusing to be gaslit into forgetting. Memory is insurgent. Ritualized naming turns memory into pressure. Pressure changes behavior. The economic shock didn't end. It compounded. Inflation punished the obedient. Debts hardened into futures. Austerity returned, framed as responsible governance. The aftermath exposes the inversion. Billions were created for contracts, but dignity is too expensive. An economy that rewards monopolies and punishes independence isn't recovering, it's consolidating. The answer isn't waiting for mercy. It's building alternative circuits. Co-ops that refuse capture, local credit systems, privacy-first commerce, shared manufacturing, and broadcast channels that carry truth without corporate filtration. Resistance moved from protest signs to operational architecture, not performative outrage, functional defiance. Privacy-first business structures that can't be shaken down by policy whiplash. Mutual aid that outperforms state bureaucracy. community tribunals that collect testimony and publish precedent, open ledgers that map contracts, cash flows, and names without compromise. The aftermath is logistics. Who holds the keys? Who keeps the records? Who trains the next hands? Power without paperwork is noise. Power with artifacts is transfer. The spiritual wound required naming without euphemism. We were told to clap instead of mourn, to isolate instead of comfort, to obey instead of love. That inversion breaks people. The antidote is ritual with integrity, the return of funerals without permission, collective remembrance that refuses apology, and public naming of denied dignity. Not therapy. Speak truth, speak. The aftermath is sacred because grief is sacred. When you honor grief, you dissolve control. When you dissolve control, you restore sovereignty. Media tried to rebrand the era, to soften the edges with documentaries and anniversary specials. The aftermath rejects sanitization. It favors primary sources: footage, minutes, contracts, and first-hand accounts. It favors ledgers over think pieces, receipts over opinions, artifacts over editorials. The aftermath trains people to verify, not to trust, to reproduce evidence, not to rehearse narratives. Once the public can build truth without gatekeepers, propaganda loses its teeth. Politically, the aftermath is not choosing saviors. It's shrinking the surface area of capture. Reduce what can be mandated. Remove what can be coerced. Eliminate dependencies that become levers. The question isn't who should lead us. It's what can no longer be taken from us. That shift is maturity. It's the difference between petitioning and building, between performance and architecture. The aftermath teaches a harsh lesson about time. You cannot return stolen years, but you can prevent the next theft. That means pre-commitments. No emergency powers without automatic sunset and citizen audit. No secret contracts. No health theater without proportion and context. No censorship masquerading as safety. No rituals of obedience dressed as unity. Codify it in public charters, sign it in communities, publish it as artifacts, rehearse it until it's reflex. The aftermath replaces blind trust with rehearsed sovereignty. Forgiveness is complicated. Some want reconciliation. Others want justice. The aftermath chooses clarity first. Name the acts. Publish the evidence. Then decide consequences. Justice without clarity is vengeance. Clarity without consequence is theater. The right sequence matters. The aftermath is a sequence grief: naming, evidence, precedent, consequence, structure. And through it all, there is love, but not the sentimental kind. Love that keeps dignity intact. Love that refuses permission to mourn. Love that teaches children to recognize manipulation and defend their boundaries. Love that builds infrastructure so elders never die alone again. Love that says never again and can prove it because the architecture exists. The aftermath is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of adulthood for a people. Childhood trusted slogans. Adulthood writes charters. Childhood waited for rescue. Adulthood trains neighbors. Childhood watched dashboards. Adulthood audits ledgers. The world's first pandemic took rituals, rites, and livelihoods. The aftermath returns them, not by asking, but by building. If you felt the inversion, if you buried without mourning, if you clapped instead of holding hands, if you paid while they profited, then you're already awake. The task now is simple and brutal. Turn that awareness into artifacts, habits, and structures that make repetition impossible. Build memory that bites. Build economy that resists. Build community that shields. Build media that cannot be bought. Build law that sunsets panic. And rehearse it not once, but forever. The reckoning, the world's first pandemic, was sold as protection. In truth, it was theater. It was a script rehearsed in boardrooms, performed on podiums, and enforced in streets. It was not just a health crisis, it was a ritual of control. And now, in the aftermath, comes the reckoning. The moment when the fog clears, when the lies are named, when the profiteers are exposed, and when the people decide that obedience will never again be their currency. The reckoning, the ledger of betrayal. Every act of denial must be written. Parents who died alone. Elders isolated in care homes. Funerals criminalized. Families fined for mourning. Businesses destroyed. Children raised in fear. Communities fractured. Each entry is not just memory, it is evidence. The reckoning begins with the ledger. Names, dates, denials. Contracts signed in secrecy. Profits recorded in billions. Politicians caught laughing while citizens grieved. The ledger is not opinion, it is fact, and fact is weapon. The reckoning demands that the ledger be public, not hidden in archives, not softened in documentaries, not sanitized in anniversary specials. Published openly, reproduced endlessly, taught to children, rehearsed in communities. The ledger is the antidote to propaganda. It dissolves lies with evidence. It strips away illusions with receipts. It makes forgetting impossible. The reckoning begins with memory that bites. The naming of profiteers, the money trail must be named. PPE contracts funneled through VIP lanes. Masks turned into commodities. Vaccines into billion-pound harvests. Pharmaceutical corporations enriched. Tech giants expanded. Online retailers thrived. Politicians with investments profited while citizens endured austerity. The reckoning demands names, not vague accusation-specific identities. Who signed the contracts? Who received the payments? Who sat on the boards? Who cashed the checks? Naming is ritual. Naming is power. Naming is justice. The reckoning is not about conspiracy. It is about clarity. The profiteers are not shadows. They are public. Their names are printed in procurement records, their profits in annual reports, their connections in registers of interests. The reckoning demands that these names be spoken without fear, published without dilution, remembered without compromise. Profiteers thrive on secrecy. The reckoning thrives on exposure. The stripping of illusions. The slogans must be stripped of their sanctity. Stay home. Protect the NHS. Save lives. Hands. Face. Flatten the curve. These were not advice. They were commands. They were not unity. They were conditioning. They were not protection. They were obedience. The reckoning demands that slogans be recognized for what they were. Instruments of control. Rituals of conformity. Tools of fear. The illusions of unity must also be stripped. Celebrities singing from mansions. Influencers posting hashtags. Politicians clapping for carers while denying funerals. These were not solidarity. They were spectacle. They were not compassion. They were distraction. They were not culture. They were propaganda. The reckoning demands that illusions be named, stripped, and discarded. No more applause in place of mourning. No more hashtags in place of dignity. No more spectacle in place of truth. The rallying cry for sovereignty. The reckoning is not just about naming betrayal. It is about building sovereignty. Sovereignty means independence from manipulation, resilience against capture, immunity to propaganda. It means communities that can feed themselves, businesses that cannot be shuttered by decree, media that cannot be bought, rituals that cannot be denied. Sovereignty is not abstract. It is architecture. It is ledgers, charters, co-ops, broadcasts, and tribunals. It is artifacts that teach without permission. It is memory that cannot be erased. The reckoning demands that sovereignty be rehearsed, not once, but forever. Every community must build its own circuits of resilience. Every family must teach its children to recognize manipulation. Every citizen must rehearse refusal. Sovereignty is not given, it is built. The reckoning is the blueprint. The discipline of anger. Anger without discipline burns out. Discipline turns anger into precedent. The reckoning demands discipline. Grief must be documented. Betrayal must be named. Profiteering must be exposed. Contracts must be published. Evidence must be reproduced. Discipline turns outrage into architecture. It ensures that the reckoning is not just noise, it is structure. Structure that resists repetition. Structure that prevents capture. Structure that restores sovereignty. The consequence. The reckoning demands consequence. Betrayal without consequence is theater. Profiteering without consequence is license. Hypocrisy without consequence is contempt. The reckoning demands that consequences be real. Not symbolic apologies, not empty resignations, not cosmetic reforms. Real consequences. Contracts revoked, profits reclaimed, laws rewritten, powers sunset. Consequence is not vengeance, it is justice. Justice without consequence is illusion. The reckoning demands reality. The People's Charter, the reckoning must end with a charter. A public document, rehearsed in communities, signed without permission, published without dilution. The charter must codify refusal. No emergency powers without automatic sunset. No secret contracts. No censorship disguised as safety. No rituals of obedience dressed as unity. The charter must be artifact. Artifact that teaches. Artifact that resists. Artifact that endures. The reckoning demands that the people write their own law, independent of institutions, immune to capture. Act 12. Conclusion. The reckoning is the 12th act of the Corona Chronicle. It is the moment when grief becomes evidence, anger becomes discipline, naming becomes justice, and sovereignty becomes architecture. It is the moment when the world's first pandemic is recognized not just as a health crisis, but as a ritual of control. It is the moment when the people decide that obedience will never again be their currency. The reckoning is not just about the past, it is about the future. The reckoning is relentless. It speaks in ledgers, in names, in charters. It silences illusions, magnifies truth, and restores sovereignty. It turns grief into precedent, betrayal into consequence, obedience into refusal. It is not just about memory, it is about power. The reckoning strips dignity from profiteers, exposes hypocrisy, and builds sovereignty. And it does so under the banner of the world's first pandemic, a phrase that carried terror, obedience, and profiteering in equal measure, but now carries exposure, consequence, and resistance. This was never just about a virus. It was about ritualized obedience, the fog of substitution, and the theater of control. Every taped floor, every shifting rule, every televised number was a signal. You are being conditioned. But signals can be inverted. We can burn away the fog, expose the contradictions, and reclaim sovereignty. The coronavirus spectacle is not the end, it is the precedent. Carry this ledger forward, copy it, teach it, and refuse dilution. This is Wake TF Up, sovereign signal. The rally point for those who refuse comfort, refuse fog, and demand truth. Sovereignty is not given, it is taken back. Wake TF Up.